So welcome back everybody to our next Appy Hour. We are here with Morgan Hudson, who is joining us from Creekview High School. So thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today. I know you're going to be sharing about question formulation technique with shared documents. So we're really interested to see what you have to teach us today. It's all yours. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And do I need to click record or anything? Or are we good to go?
I believe we're already recording, so you should be good to go. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so welcome and thank you for coming. We're like Lydia said, we are talking about the question formulation technique with shared documents. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Morgan Hudson. I have my specialist in curriculum and instruction, and I have a master's degree in instructional technology. I'm from Creekview High School. I teach AP US History there, and I have 7 years teaching experience in high school. And then there's some things about me. So today I have made a Wakelet, and I'll show you what that looks like here, and I'll put the link in the chat so you could have it. But this is just like a one-stop shop for you guys. That you could use outside of our little session here today. And so I have all about using the question formulation technique in this collection. And so if you've never been on a Wakelet before, I just wanted to show you what that looks like. So it's links to all of these different areas that have articles to read or how-tos or videos. So all of that is in there. So you could take a look at that. I also have the presentation that we're going through today in the how-to guide of how to actually do the sharing of the documents, and the presentation lives there, along with some articles about how the question formulation technique works in multiple settings. So if you use Canvas, there's stuff in there for that, Google Docs, Microsoft, college setting, even high school setting stuff. Of some anecdotes really of how this works in different settings. So those are all there for you guys. And like I said, I'll put that in the chat here as we go along so you can check it out and use it now or even later. And we are a Microsoft district, so a lot of the things I'm going to talk about will be Microsoft based, but you can apply that to any sort of programming that you're using. So to give some background about the question formulation technique, this is from the Right Question Institute. And so this is a way to really elevate students' thinking and bring them from, just kind of looking at a document, a picture, and getting them to think deeper and ask questions about something. Don't just, expect information to be fed to you, and actually have them digging into the content and building skills, not just for your class, but skills that they can apply to multiple different platforms and experiences and activities that they participate in, not just your content area. And what's so great about this is it can be applied to several different contents. And, I have a background in social studies, but it can be applied to really anything that we're looking at here. So the strategy behind this is to get students to ask better questions and to get them to really advocate for themselves, make more effective decisions. And that's going to translate over beyond the classroom and be something that they can really hold on to and use these skills and apply them. Actually, my specialist, I was actually looking at how to create more civic learners. And this is something that I talk about, is how this is something that they could apply outside of the classroom. And the following, or the previous two slides, have been from the Right Question Institute and their verbiage there, just to give them a shout out there for those two slides. All right, so to get into what this actually looks like, we have the students producing their own questions, but that is first after you create your focus question. So I prefer that the instructor create the focus question or do it in a collaborative setting where you're working with the students to sit down and say, all right, what do we really want to focus on? And so for me, I usually do this as a preview to a unit or a topic. So they have just enough information to be curious, but this is something that the focus question is something that this is going to give them a taste of in the question formulation technique, and then going beyond that after, after they do this technique and then what we're about to talk about. So this focus question is something that leads our lessons for, several, like a day or several days, depending on the unit. So you can use this technique during a unit, outside of a unit, or a topic. It can be really applied anywhere. Like I said, I do typically use it before, just in the nature of my class, but this could really just be an isolated thing that you do for one of your lessons. So first things first is the students need to have whatever, after you've got your focus question selected, you will need to figure out like your source that you want them to look at. So that can be a document, it can be a website if you wanted them to look at some sort of news source, it can be some sort of research-based document that you want them to look at. It can really be anything. And they have to produce their questions. So I usually give my students 10 questions, 10 minutes to ask their questions. That way, you get a lot of really quick questions at the beginning if you're doing an image, but if you're doing a longer document, that gives them time to dig in and ask questions about the document. And so with the questions that they're asking, they have 4 rules. They ask as many questions as they can. They don't discuss them. So if you're doing it collaboratively, which is what we're going to talk about here in just a bit, everyone just heads down, typing away, figuring out what they want to say. And then after this question production process is done, then they stop back and, okay, now we're going to actually look at what we've written down, who's done something similar, and things like that. If you do this in the classroom, because you can also do this in the classroom, you can have a scribe and have someone writing the stuff down as you're saying it. So then you can get a lot of ideas kind of to one person and then they write it down. And then if you just put any statements out there, just go back and make sure that those are questions. So that's usually about the first 10 minutes of the process. And that's where we're going to show how to set that up, which I'll show you here in just a second. And then after that, we get into the improve your questions, which I'll show you what that looks like here in just a bit as well. And then strategize, and then we reflect. These are numbers 3 and 4 and 5 we're going to talk about later in the presentation. So let's get on to how we set this up so you can actually use this with your students. And you can actually use this with your faculty too. You can use this with basically anyone. So now we're going to look at it in action with the shared documents and how that looks. So like I said earlier, our school district is a Microsoft district. So this is going to be through that lens of Word and Microsoft, but I'll show you where to find it for Google if you use Google in your classes. So here is typically what it looks like before it gets shared with everyone. You can see here, this is where I would put my source. If it was a link, a picture, if you wanted to copy and paste your source onto this piece of paper, that's fine. And then I always have a section where the focus question is, and then the rules. So the students always have that at their forefront so that they know what's expected of them during the question producing time. Now, when you get to this section, you are typically, if you're doing this virtually, your students are already on a Teams call, on a Zoom call, on something where you're already talking to them. And so they're already ready and live. And you can actually even do this, like if you had a hybrid class and you wanted your kids that are at home participating with students who are in the classroom or vice versa. So you can do this in the classroom or outside of the classroom with the shared document technique. So with this, you'll insert the focus questions, which are right there, and the rules. So that's what I have set up before I even share the document with the students. So then I create a table, and the table is, you would go to Insert on Word, and then find the table section, and then you would select your rows based on how many groups that you need. And then the columns, I always do 2 columns because one's going to be the group name and then one's going to be the space that they write in. So you can see I've got I did 5 groups here, and then we would add in group, whatever groups you want to name them. So I just named them 1, 2, 3, 4. It usually makes more sense for me to do that, so that I could just number the kids. All right, you're in group 1, 2, 3, 4. But if you wanted to be a little bit more creative, you can name them whatever you'd like and name them that way. And then you leave the right side blank. I usually put a couple spaces in there so they know to keep typing in that blank space over there. All right, so for the groups, what I like to do is if I'm doing a shared Teams call with them, then I like to put them in breakout rooms after I give them their groups that they're going to be in. You could group them based off of interest. You can base them off of, a lot of differentiated ways. You could do it based, like I said, interest on certain people that work together. You can just blanket it, randomize it. Hey, 1 through 5 on here, you go do it however you'd like. I put them in the breakout rooms I suggest putting them in the breakout rooms during the discussion portion so that they can get together and talk about why they made certain decisions and really go through the questions. So I would do that after they write down all the questions that they want to have, like what they put on their paper. You could also assign students specific colors so that you can see who's participating in each group and how many questions that they contribute. And then you could also assign, when you do this, you assign them to that group so they know where they're working. So like we saw in the last slide where they had the groups, you tell them, hey, you're in group 1, you work in that blank space next to group 1 so they don't interfere with other group members. So then we get to the sharing part. So with the sharing part, you click the share button up here. This looks very similar if you're doing this on Office 365 or in Google. There's that share button. It'll either have a hyperlink looking button next to it, or it'll look like this in Word. And then the thing about sharing it with other students is that you have to upload it to either the OneDrive, so it's on your Office 365, or on Google Docs, which is already in the drive there on the Google Drive. So it has to be shared there. So for us, since we're a Microsoft district, it logs me in to my OneDrive account. So you can see that there. So if you don't have one, you set one up or use Google Docs as well. So I will share it to my OneDrive. And then once I've done that, it'll take me here to the send the link. So you want to make sure that it says anyone with the link can edit, or you can type in those students' names if it's a small group and you just, can type their names in and email them personally. When I have a bigger class, I just like to share them a link to anyone can edit. Of course, you got to be mindful. They could share that with others and then other people could be in there. But for the most part, my kids haven't had any issues with them doing that. So it usually works out pretty well. If it doesn't say that they can edit, you will want to change those settings, and that goes for any other program you're using. So this is what it would look like if you clicked on it. It would say, share with anyone with a link. You make sure that's checked, and then make sure it says allow editing. And then you would save it down here at the bottom, and then you're good to go. So then we're back to this screen. Then you click copy the link. And then after you click copy the link, you get to this slide where you would copy this link to send to the students. So after you get that link, you send it to the students. It goes, again, through Teams or the chat or however you want to get it to them. I have thought about doing this asynchronously where you would send it to them ahead of time, but I don't think you get quite the organic situation that you would if you weren't doing it live, because you want to give them that time constraint of 10 minutes of the question formulation portion, because you want them to try their best to write down as many questions as they can in that time period. so that it's getting them to think very quickly and on their feet. And I'll get to why that is in just a second. So that's the link that you send and share to the students. So like I mentioned while I was going through that, there are similar instructions to do that in Google Docs and Office 365. I put step-by-step instructions of that in the Wakelet so that you have access to that for Office 365 or Google Docs, and what I just went through as well if you need that for reference. So now we're going to see in action and what it looked like for when I with my students. So when you share it with students, you're going to see here when they jump on and collaborate. Now, if you see the GC, it usually means guest contributor. So that just means that they weren't logged into their Office 365. If you see any other initials, then they've logged into their account and they're working in that. And you can actually track you as the host of the document can see what they have contributed, where they've written, and all of that. So for this one, they were analyzing the Boston Massacre image because we were talking about, AP US history and the American Revolution. So when I gave this to my students, I gave this to them right after we had led up some of the events prior to the breakout of the Boston Massacre. So they had just a taste of prior knowledge of what was going on before this, but they really don't have any information about this image. Paul Revere, not really a lot of information about him as well, so that they really can dig into this document and ask anything. And when they get to asking questions, they can ask anything, but like, why is the sky kind of blue on one side? Why is it darker on the other? Why are they wearing red? I mean, they can get so simple with their questions, and you can see some of their questions. I know it's a little tiny there for you, but the questions can get really vague or really specific. And that's the great thing about it. And you give them about 10 minutes to do this. And it doesn't have to be 10 minutes. You can do less, you can do more. But I say 10 minutes because it gives them enough time to get the basic questions out of the way, then come back and start thinking, okay, well, I've still got time. What else am I going to ask about this question? And then it gets them to think a little bit harder about what they're looking at. And then you'll see other people writing and you're like, oh, they already asked that question. So then they start thinking, okay, well, what else can I ask? So they don't realize it, but they're really digging into the question and figuring out what is going on. And, some kids get, as you can see here, get real creative with their questions. Like, why is the dog there? What is he doing? Why is he dead? Or why isn't he, dead? So things like that. You can get kind of fun with it, with their questioning. And then some, you get down into it and start to analyze what they, think about it. And they don't even realize what they're doing, which makes it even better. And
I think we're all smirking, Megan, at the one that says, what is thy dog doing in the heat of combat?
Oh, that's awesome question.
That's funny. Yeah.
I love
it. Yeah, you can see the characters that I have in my class. They are always a good time. I like when they try to use the language of the time in their typing there. And we did this on a virtual day. And so you're sitting there on the other end, you're like, okay, I see you. I see what you're picking up there. So with this, I was going to say, these kids are juniors in high school, to give you some preface of when they would be taking APUSH. Some other things that you can see, like this was, I told them, whoever starts in that box, just put number of 1, so they numbered it. If they don't do that, then they need to go back and number it, or at the end, you can tell them, hey, highlight everything, number it, because you want to number them for when they were created. And that goes to show the students that they may not have thought of the best question at the beginning. Sometimes that better questioning comes later after you pondered it and thought about it. And so for me, the picture works out really well because you can literally pick out colors, symbolism, things like that. But you could also do that with like a news source where they look at credibility and look at, oh, well, you know, is this a reliable source? Do they have any bias in their news article? Or you can do that with research as well. So that's why I like this technique, because you can really go anywhere with it. So this is our chart that we set up earlier, and you can see the students just worked right in that area, and they were really good about staying in their box and not, you know, tampering with the other ones. So this was third period. So I'm going to show you, this is, I think, 7th period. And so you can see their questions are a little different. Same day, same setup, same everything, but you can see the difference in the students and what they got out of the image versus another class period who looked at it. And then you can see on this screenshot that I had the rules there, the focus question: how does the Boston Massacre impact the road to revolution, which is what they were trying to focus on while they were looking through that. So that is something that we would discuss after they do this question formulation technique. So after the 10 minutes is up, my students then would be put into the breakout rooms, and they go back and discuss, all right, are these questions open or closed? And so that's why you see all the O's and C's for when the screenshot was taken. They had to figure out if it's an open question or a closed question. Now, the Right Question Institute that has the question formulation technique, they actually have a PowerPoint slide that goes through the process with them. And so instead of me going through that with my students, I actually just had that printed out for me to talk through that process with them. But if you were doing this in class, you could actually have the presentation, or you could share the presentation where you talk through, well, what's an open-ended question? Why is that good? Well, what's a closed question? Why is that good? And what does that do? So open questions would be ones that you can't answer with a yes or no statement. And then closed questions are ones that are just yes or no or one word answers that you can go Google really quickly. Open-ended have to have analysis or deeper, insight there. So like our focus question, how does the Boston Massacre impact the road to revolution? That's not like a Google answer. You have to really think about it, develop that to see what that looks like. So that's what my students have done here, and they did that in a discussion with their groups. And so then after I have them do that in their groups, I have them go back while they're still in their group. So I say, all right, pick your open and closed statements, circle, put the O's and the C's. So we're all still working in our collaborative document, and they're discussing it in their breakout rooms. I, as the instructor, pop into the different ones and check on them, see if they have any questions, make sure they're on task, things like that. And the other task that I give them while they're in those groups is to pick out their top 3, depending on how many questions they get, their top 3 questions in their group. Like, which ones are the ones that you have to have answered to be able to answer your focus questions. So before you can even touch that focus questions, what do you need to know about this document? So they pick out those questions from that. So then after they've done those things, we call them all back in. This could take anywhere, it depends on how many focus questions you want them to pick and how chatty your class is about discussions and things of that nature. Anywhere between like 5 to 10 minutes. You could do 15, depending on, again, how many questions they come up with. My students here, we were on a tighter schedule, and I couldn't allow them 10 minutes to go through all the questions. So I gave them about 5, so they didn't come up with as many as they normally would if they had the full 10. So do we have any questions so far about the process, what that looks like, before we get into the reflection piece where they would come back together? All right. So after they do the QFT, we come back, talk to them, and then we go through like the open and closed questions, which we were just talking about in our session there, or on our last slide, and then they prioritize that. So once they prioritize those 3 questions, they will need to pick a speaker. So when we come back whole group, that they will share why they picked those top 3 and what that means to them in their group and why they needed that. So that was part of that discussion piece that they have. So now they're having to justify themselves as to why they picked those and explain that to the class. So once we come back as a whole group, then we come in and have each group share, all right, these are my top 3, this is one, these are my top 3, so that they can get that, reflection piece in there to see why, what they need to be able to answer the focus question. After everyone goes, then we, as a class, pick the top 3 to 4 as a class out of all of the groups. So after you heard everyone's explanations, then we'll pick our top 3 as a whole class, and then we'll need to explain to the class, okay, well, why would we pick this one? How is this going to help us out? And then we reflect on the process, and we kind of, for me, we hold those questions to the side. And as we go through the content of what happened at the Boston Massacre, the events after the Boston Massacre as a result of it, then we go back and see, you can connect the dots, right? Because the students don't really see how those dots connect just yet. So we hold them off to the side and we answer those as we go along. And then we say, hey, look how that all relates back to the focus question. Look what you were able to do just by analyzing those documents or the one document that you have to bring it back full circle. And for us in AP US History, we are analyzing documents all the time. Like that's literally our job. We're taking on the role as historians. And so this is something that they get really familiar with and used to doing as they're going through and reflecting and seeing that come back whole circle. It's kind of like hindsight's 2020, where they look back and say, oh, well, that's how I got there. That's how we can answer that question. And even if they've never seen the document, they already know, they can already figure out and know so much more about it because of that. And so we bring it back to that topic and discuss it. And then we move on from there with our content, discussing that and, answering the focus question for that unit. And that pretty much is the question formulation technique using the shared documents with the Word and Teams session. Does anyone have any questions? If not, I'd love to stay connected with you guys. I'm on Instagram and Twitter, and then there's my email. And if you have any ideas, want to collaborate, my students are always up for collaboration and reaching out to other students. And yeah, thank you for attending. And if you want to brainstorm or discuss, I'm more than happy to stay on and do that with you guys. Thanks.
Well, I'm sorry, I missed the first part of it.
That's all right.
It was fantastic, by the way.
Yeah.
Great job.
Thank you.
Have you looked at, and I'm not a OneNote expert, but we did see at least one Appy Hour about OneNote last semester. And I'm wondering if OneNote might also be a good place for this kind of thing to happen, or would it just require too much training beforehand for the students, whereas Word is kind of you type?
I think if you set that up ahead of time and you do this often enough that you set that precedent, and it would definitely work just the same. And then you could actually keep it in an organized binder and see them do it over time. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, for Word, sometimes it's just, if you're doing it just for a lesson, it's easy to just pop that up, throw it on there, and then the students go right then. But if you have something established, I think that's a great idea.
What do you think has been your biggest challenge using the question formulation technique? Because I know we have an Appy Hour about that as well. And I've been interested in using it in my own course, but I haven't. And I really like how you're walking us through the process of doing it, hybrid or in person or just online. So I think you give some great insight on how to really organize that type of lesson. But what has been your biggest challenge, you think, using QFT?
I would say, like, as an instructor, I think finding the right source. I think that would be a challenge at first, just to find something that's not too heavy that they kind of get lost in, that they're reading a lot and not just like, looking at it and analyzing it. That's why for me, I like to stick to images or short pages that they would read, like 1-2 pages. So first off, that would be some reservations, because some of my stuff some of my topics I wouldn't necessarily use it for, just because it doesn't flow very well. But like a cause and effect situation for history is really great for this, because you can be like, all right, here's a little bit of a cause. You're going to see how this plays out later. So it really gets the students interested in it. As far as like the delivery of it, with being like a challenge of delivery, would be getting students to because you can't see them, and you're just like, all right, 5 minutes on the timer. And they're like, okay, I'm typing as fast as I can. And it's like, they're not really typing as fast as they can type of thing. So that would probably be just giving them that sense of urgency and making sure that you're saying, hey, I really want you to see as quickly as you can, to see what you can do and really create that for them, so that they are like, oh yeah, like, let's see how many we can get. I mean, you could even say, all right, the group that gets the most questions gets, something, or kind of give them some incentive, or a gold star, just something to make it fun, to make them want to answer those questions.
How long would you suggest that this should take place? Like 30 minutes, 45 minutes? Like, have you found like that sweet spot where you think, okay, now we're done, let's move on to something else?
I would say 25 minutes, probably 25 minutes. You can cut down the time on the question formulation, like the question time. When I did it in person, we did 10 minutes because handwriting takes a little bit longer to do. And when I did it with the 10 minutes, I only had 2 people scribing. And so that took some time of someone telling you and then writing it down. But when I did it digitally, like it's mentioned earlier, I just did 5 minutes. So then we could, they're typically much quicker at typing. So I could get a lot of questions out, enough to be able to have a discussion about. But yeah, it wouldn't take I wouldn't say anything over 30 minutes is like, okay, I'm done with this. And the kids are kind of lost interest and everything. So as long as you keep it short and sweet, then they usually hang with you. And that's why I like to do it as a preview, because they don't really know anything about it. So they can't, make much connections. So they really do have all questions about it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I was reading through some of your stuff. Your resources are great, by the way. So thanks for sharing those. I was reading about the one where community college students discussed the paper that questions the role of grades. And I was sitting there thinking like, well, how could I do this with a scientific article as a biologist? And so have the students read, for the higher education stuff, have them read a science article and then, say, all right, you guys get in this group, you guys get in this group, and let's see what questions you have about the article and lead to a better understanding, because sometimes they all have the same question, they just don't know it.
Absolutely, that's a great idea. And if you have, like, say your science article, you could have your question, your focus question be on something that you're wanting them to figure out or try to address. And they don't even know that those questions will lead to that, but that you'll be able to make that connection and help them see that.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did you find out anything about the dog?
The dog. He's actually there to show innocence and how the colonists are very innocent. And you could see that in the picture as they're all like powering away, like they weren't starting or instigating anything and they had no weapons. And so the dog was to symbolize the innocence of it.
Well, see, how very interesting is that? It's kind of a cheeky question, but at the same time, there's some art symbolism going on there.
Yes.
And that's fantastic. What about the moon in the upper left?
Well, that's kind of interesting because it actually, it happened in like the daylight. It didn't actually happen at night. So that was just kind of there.
Huh.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting in your 7th period class, also how you can kind of see how recent events might be shaping the way they view the picture. And some of them asking, well, why are they shooting an unarmed person? And that just stuck out to me right away. That could be a larger conversation too, of how they're reacting to current events and how this type of event could actually tie into what's going on nowadays. And so that also opens up the floor to other discussions in the classroom, you know, and making that personal connection to what they're learning.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why I love it so much, because it's just something that you're just asking them to ask questions. And you know, and by doing it this way, the more shy or hesitant kids, they're more apt to participate. And so you get a lot more. That's why I didn't color code. I didn't have the students color coding who was writing, but I would be curious to see, you know, how many, you know, which students are participating. And sometimes I may not want to color code it, because then somebody like, oh, well, she knows who I am. You know what I mean? So, you know, it's up to you how you want to do that. If you really want to know who's doing what. But yeah, I feel more people type though their responses than when we have it in the classroom, because I've done it both ways. I love all the ideas that y'all have. I'm like, ooh, that sounds great too. I love that.
Well, we have a YouTube channel, and you will soon be a star on it. So I'll make sure to forward the link to our YouTube channel where we're hosting all these happy hours.
Awesome.
Because, man, this last set, we've had some tremendous happy hours in the spring. We had some great ones in the fall too, but just everyone that we've seen so far has, you know, got my wheels spinning about, I want to do that. I want to use that tool. So thank you for sharing, for sure.
You're welcome. Happy to do it any other time too, not just for happy hour.
Yes, thank you so much, Morgan, for coming and speaking with us today. We really appreciate your time, and it's been a pleasure having you here at Reinhardt. We do have one more set of happy hours coming up next week. So I know Dr. Conklin will be in touch with you about that. I don't remember off the top of my head who that is. I apologize. I should have had that information ready to go, but I do not. But I know we have a great way to kind of round that up. And we will also be running our first conference, Control C, what have we learned from our experiences teaching during the pandemic? That will be coming up in June. So also take a look in your email for that correspondence from us. We'd love to have you back to share some of your insights with us and create more of a partnership with our educators in secondary education. So thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. And the rest of you all have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.